So let's quickly look at it, finding errors. A central banker is usually never on the front page of any newspaper. Thought there is some sort of financial crisis or an interest rate announcement. So let's look at it. A central banker is usually never, part 1, on the front page of any newspaper. Thought, is it thought or though? I don't know if this is a typo error. Where is Kamalesan? There is some sort of financial crisis, C, or an interest rate announcement. Okay. 4 parts, right? Which part has the error? So let's understand the context, right? They're saying this person, a central banker, is usually never on the front page of any newspaper. So under what circumstances will this person be in the front page of any newspaper? Only if there is some sort of financial crisis or an interest rate announcement. So I understand the context. So I need to know if the connecting word is correct or not. Alright, that's where my question to you is. So a central banker is usually never on the front page of any newspaper. So under what circumstances is he? Only if there is some financial crisis or an interest rate announcement. So is though correct here? There is a condition. Raghav, good point. You said until. Right? When will I use until? Only when there is a time reference. In this context, is there a time reference or they have mentioned a condition? So under what circumstances? Under the condition that there is some sort of financial crisis or an interest rate announcement. So obviously, I don't need this though here. Incorrect connecting word, right? So Mahindranath, correct. And Karthik also, right? You need to remove that though and put unless, which is the right conjunction. So a central banker is usually never on the front page of any newspaper unless there is some sort of financial crisis or an interest rate announcement. When I say usually, what you're saying? Generally, that's not the case. So you have sentences, right? I can say, he's usually never this quiet. Raghav, why not until? Because there's no time reference made, boss. I am allowed to stay out until 6 o'clock. I am allowed to take the session until 9 o'clock, right? There's a time reference. I'm allowed to be in this room until my manager arrives, right? There is a time reference. That's when you use until. In this context, we're using, there's a condition given. That's why we saw this in differences between unless and until. You use unless when there is a condition. You use until when there is a time reference. Simple. So the error is in part C. Change though to unless. Okay. Let's look at the next one. No, how can either come here, Manindranath? There are no two components that you're comparing, right? Either this or that is not there. There is only one pretext given to you. A central banker is usually never on the front page of any newspaper unless, so there is only one thing there. So either or doesn't make sense here. Look at the next one. On the basis of their complaints, an FIR has been registered under relevant sections of the IPC and the Prevention of Corruption Act, and both of them will be quizzed in coming days if it will important for the case, he said. Oh my goodness, just reading the sentence, I know there are multiple errors. Alright, what are all the errors in this sentence? Very obvious error. What is the obvious error here? If I have to put either or, whoever asked that question, I have to rephrase the entire sentence. I'm just going to the previous question, right? I need to say a central banker is usually on the front page of any newspaper, either for some sort of financial crisis or for an interest rate announcement. Then it makes sense for me to use either or, right? Are you following whoever asked me that question? if I have to use either or in the first thing, I will change the entire sentence. I'm writing it down for you. A central banker is usually, I will remove never, on the front page of any newspaper either for some sort of financial crisis or for an interest rate announcement. Now it makes sense for me to use either or, right? I changed the entire context. Now it makes sense. But in this context, yes. So a central banker is usually on the front page of any newspaper, either for some sort of financial crisis or for an interest rate announcement. A central banker is usually never on the front page of any newspaper unless there is some sort, okay? Anyway, second one, we are focusing on the second one. So what is the error in the second part? Yeah, the obvious error. I think this is a typo error, if I'm not wrong. This person is not here to contradict it. So this is one whole thing, right? On the basis of their complaints, not on FIR, N FIR. Yeah, somebody pointed that out. So that's one error. First error is that. Second error, under relevant sections IPC and the Prevention of Corruption Act, and both of them will be quizzed in the coming days. And again, I have another error which is in 4. If it will important, if it is important, right? See the whole context here. If it is important for the case, then both of them will be quizzed in the coming days, right? So already I have will be quizzed, so I can't have will important. Something has to be done now. If this is what it is, then this will happen, right? So I need the simple present here in the fourth part. If it is important for the case, both of them will be quizzed in the coming days. So 3 errors, multiple errors in this question. I'm assuming the first one was a typo error, and I'm assuming the fourth one also was a typo error, if I'm not wrong, right? In the coming days is actually an expression, Rajesh. Something will happen in the coming days, right? It looks like we can expect monsoon in the coming days. It looks like the exam pattern might change for SBI clerk in the coming days, right? I'm just giving you random examples. So in the coming days is just an expression as it is. Let's look at the last one. Okay, let's look at the last one. In what was perceived as a counter to critics who had attacked him for keeping interest rates high for long, RBI governor said the Indian Central Bank was wise to disregard advice in the past to cut more deeply. Do you think there is any error in this sentence? So Rajkumar says third one, remove more. It's superfluous. Quizzed, before we move to the next one, quizzed is absolutely fine in this context, right? Basically they're saying that both these parties, whoever it is, will be quizzed, matlab they'll be fired questions one after the other. So vocabulary wise, it's absolutely fine. So let's look at this one. In what was perceived as a counter to critics who had attacked him for keeping interest rates high for long, RBI governor said the Indian Central Bank was wise to disregard advice in the past to cut more deeply. So, couple of things for you guys, right? Any expressions you notice? In fact, I don't know who said delete more, it's superfluous. In fact, that's an expression. Are you able to follow what the expression is? Let's see who's able to identify the expression in the context. Option 3 has an error. What is the error? RBI governor said the Indian Central Bank was wise to disregard advice. More is quantifier. So when you say in what was, what you mean here is perceived as a counter. So which means somebody looked at something in a particular light, right? Someone looked at something in a certain light. Yeah, meaning to say that this is what they thought it was. So in what was perceived as a counter to critics who had attacked him for keeping interest rates high for long. So how did people view this? Perceived means this is how they saw it. This is how they looked at it, right? So in what was, this is the situation. That's what it means. So I could, to use this as in an example sentence, I can say, in what was assumed to be a play, it actually turned out to be a movie, right? So somebody has a different perception than what the actual thing was. So in what was perceived as a counter to critics, so this response, RBI governor's response, was looked at as a counter to the critics. Said the Indian central government was wise to disregard advice. See, we don't need Rocha, we don't need the here because we don't know what specific advice they're talking about. Some advice was given, right? So was wise to disregard advice in the past. So this thing not being there does not change the meaning of the sentence, right? Because we don't know what advice is given. Specific advice is not mentioned in the context, so we really don't care. So to disregard advice in the past, to cut more deeply, meaning this is an expression, actually comes from the expression to cut to the bone. Right? This is an idiomatic expression. Again, I'm just assuming the punctuations are not here, right? I'm sure there's a punctuation here. Said that, both are fine. The RBI governor said, the Indian Central, so like I said, the punctuations are missing, we don't have to worry about that. To cut to the bone is an idiom, right? That's what this expression comes from, to cut more deeply. And what does it mean? To cut down severely on something, right? So in this context, probably it's referring to the Indian Central Bank cutting down on interest rates. So basically the RBI governor is saying, boss, the central government was wise to disregard advice in the past to cut more deeply, meaning to cut down severely on something, and we can assume that it is referring to interest rates. So if you ask me, the context as such, I don't see an error, right? This was what it was looked at. RBI governor's remark or reply, it was looked at as a counter to the critics. These critics had attacked him earlier because he kept the interest rates high for too long. So he's saying, boss, the Indian Central Bank was wise to disregard advice in the past to cut more deeply, matlab, to cut down severely on something. As an expression, was wise to disregard advice is correct. I don't need to add enough there. Without enough also, it still gives me the meaning. So I don't need to add extra words. The word, the expression as it is giving me the correct meaning. It's not grammatically incorrect. Right? So you don't need to look for errors when there is no error. Right? He was wise to do this. He was wise to listen to my advice. So you don't have to say he was wise enough to listen to my advice. Both are correct. See, for example, that's a good question. I'll tell you why. Because when you convert active sentence to passive sentence, right? Sometimes they say said that, sometimes they say said. But both are still correct. He said it's going to rain today. He said that it was going to rain today. Both are correct. Right? Sometimes we drop the that when we convert it to a passive sentence. Sometimes we retain it. So it's okay. Okay, so for me, this is no error, boss.